I drove 6 hours to my daughter's house for my grandson's 6th birthday party. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me. She said, "Oh, Mum, the party was Saturday. I thought I told you." She hadn't. I stood there on her front porch holding a wrapped present and a cooler full of homemade lemon bars, the ones my grandson always asked for by name. The ones I had been baking since before his mother was born. She looked past me toward the driveway, then back at me, and said they were just finishing cleanup. That it probably wasn't a good time. I heard him inside, his voice high and clear, calling for someone. Not for me. I put the cooler down on the porch step. I told her I'd leave the lemon bars. She nodded. Then she smiled the way people smile when they want a conversation to end, and she closed the door. I sat in my car for a long time. The engine was off. The street was quiet, except for a neighbor's sprinkler, going back and forth, like nothing in the world had just happened. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel and thought about how I'd gotten up at 4 a.m. to bake, how I had triple-checked the date on the text she sent me 3 weeks ago. March 14th. I had circled it on the paper calendar I keep above the kitchen sink. The drive home took longer than 6 hours, not because of traffic. Her name is Colette. She is my younger daughter, 41 years old, and she married a man named Brett about 8 years ago. They live in a nice subdivision outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. I live in Hendersonville, in the house where I raised both my girls. The house my husband Ray and I bought the year after we got married, the same year Carter was president, and gas cost 65 cents a gallon. Ray passed 4 years ago from a heart attack that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in February. One moment he was pouring coffee, the next he was gone. After that, I made peace with the quiet. I learned to sleep on my side of the bed without grieving the empty half every single night. I cooked smaller portions. I kept myself busy with my garden and the church auxiliary and the occasional lunch with my older daughter, Patsy, who lives 40 minutes away and calls me every Sunday without fail. Colette called less often. I told myself she was busy. 2 kids, a full-time job, a husband who traveled. I gave her every excuse I could think of because that's what mothers do. We fill in the gaps with grace when we should probably be filling them with questions. That evening, I unpacked the cooler and ate 2 lemon bars over the sink and did not cry. I told myself I was fine. I mostly believed it. What I didn't tell myself was this, that the missed party was not the first thing. It was simply the first thing I could no longer explain away. There had been the Thanksgiving 2 years prior when Brett mentioned, casually, over sweet potato casserole, that they were thinking about, quote, restructuring some of the family finances for estate planning purposes. I hadn't known what he meant at the time. Ray had always handled the paperwork side of things, and after he died, I had done my best to learn, but I was still finding my footing. I nodded and said that sounded sensible. I didn't ask questions. I wish now that I had asked 100. There had been the Christmas last year when I noticed the framed photo of Ray and me on Colette's mantel had been moved to a shelf in the hallway. Not thrown away, just relocated, away from the center. I told myself she was redecorating. There had been the phone call in January when she mentioned, almost in passing, that they had hired an estate attorney to help organize some of the family's long-term assets. She said it would make things simpler down the road. I said that sounded responsible. She said she would send me some paperwork to look over when it was ready. I waited. Nothing came. I thought about all of this on the drive home from Raleigh. I thought about it for several days after, and then I called Patsy. My older daughter answered on the first ring, the way she always does for me. I told her what happened with the party. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." She had been sitting on it for 2 months, she said, hadn't known how to bring it up, but a friend of hers who worked at the County Register of Deeds office had mentioned, not officially, just in the way small towns talk, that she had seen some filings come through recently with our family name attached. Filings I had never been told about. Patsy came over the next afternoon with a printout she'd requested from the register's office. We sat at the kitchen table where I have sat for 40 years, where the girls did homework, and Ray read the paper, and every important conversation in this family eventually ended up, and we looked at it together. The Lake Law property. Ray and I had bought that parcel of land together in 1987, 12 acres, on the eastern edge of Rutherford County, with a small cabin on it that we had built ourselves over 2 summers with help from Ray's brother. We had gone up there every fall for 22 years. It was where I scattered some of Ray's ashes after he died, along the ridge path we used to walk together on Sunday mornings. It was not just land, it was the last place I still felt close to him. According to the filing, the property had been transferred into an LLC 14 months ago. The name on the LLC was Merritt Family Holdings LLC. Brett's last name is Merritt. My name was not on it. I read the document 3 times. I kept thinking there had to be a mistake, a clerical error, some confusion with names or parcel numbers. I made tea. I didn't drink. Patsy sat with me and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would make the paper in front of me mean something different. That night, I went into the small cedar chest I keep at the foot of my bed. It was Ray's mother's before it was mine. Inside, under a stack of Christmas cards going back to 1979, was a folder I had not opened in years. Ray had put it together the summer before he died, when the doctor first started talking about his cholesterol and blood pressure with a seriousness that worried both of us. He had organized everything: the deed to the house, the deed to the late law property, life insurance documents, the will. I found what I needed: a copy of the property deed, both our names typed clearly, and beneath it, in Ray's handwriting on a piece of yellow legal paper, a note he had written me. Not a legal document, just a note. He wrote about the cabin, about the first night we spent there with a flashlight and a sleeping bag because the electricity wasn't connected yet, about the way the fog came off the water in the morning and how I always made him stand on the porch to look at it even when it was cold. At the bottom he wrote, "This place belongs to both of us, and after me, it belongs to you. Don't let anyone tell you different. I love you." I folded that piece of paper and held it for a long time. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Frances Okafor. She had an office on Main Street above the dry cleaners, and I had seen her name on a sign for years without ever needing her. I needed her now. Her assistant got me in that same afternoon. Frances was direct without being cold. She listened to everything without interrupting, and when I finished, she asked to see the documents I had brought. She read through them carefully. Then she asked me a question that I had been afraid to ask myself. She said, "Did you sign anything in the past 2 years? Any documents from an attorney, a notary, anything that came in the mail or was presented to you at a family gathering?" I thought about it. I went through every memory carefully. And then I remembered. Easter, 15 months ago, Brett had brought a folder to the table after dinner. He said it was something the estate attorney needed, just a formality, a signature to consolidate some of the property documentation for tax purposes. Colette had been in the kitchen. The kids were running around the yard. Brett had placed the folder in front of me with a pen and showed me where to sign, and I had signed because I trusted him, because it was Easter, because I was tired from the drive, and there was pie on the table, and nothing about that moment felt like a threat. I told Frances this. She wrote it down. Then she said she needed to see the full LLC filing and compare the signature on file with other known samples of my handwriting. She said it was possible the signature had been forged entirely, but she also said it was possible they had gotten a legitimate signature from me under false pretenses, which, depending on the circumstances and what I'd actually signed, could still be challenged as fraud through misrepresentation. I left her office with a list of documents to gather, and the quiet, settled feeling of someone who has finally stopped being confused and started being clear. The clarity wasn't comfortable. It was just true. I spent the next week going through every drawer and folder in the house. I found the Easter documents in a pile of papers I had filed under miscommunication. Brett. 2 pages. A signature line at the bottom. No explanation of the LLC. No mention of Lake Lure. Just language about streamlining asset management in a way that I now understood had meant something very different from how it had been presented to me. I also found the statements. Ray and I had a joint savings account that I had kept open after he died, for sentimental reasons mostly, and because the direct deposits from his small pension still came in monthly. Over the past 18 months, $11,000 had been transferred out of that account in increments of just under $1,000 each time, always on a weekday, always to an account I didn't recognize. I had not noticed. I had not been watching. I had been grieving and trusting and not watching. I put everything in a box and brought it to Frances. She was quiet for a long time after reviewing it. Then she said, "I want to bring in a forensic accountant, and I want you to stop communicating with your daughter and son-in-law until we understand the full picture." I nodded. I drove home. I sat on the back porch where Ray used to grill and looked out at the yard I had kept for 4 decades. The roses he planted the year my younger daughter was born were still blooming. I had kept them alive without him. I had kept everything alive without him. That evening, Colette called. I let it go to voicemail. She left a breezy message about getting together soon and asking if I wanted to come for Mother's Day weekend. Her voice sounded normal, relaxed. I listened to the message twice, and then I set the phone down and went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I didn't expect to. What I did do at 2 in the morning was get up and find the box I kept in the closet of the spare bedroom. It had been sealed with tape since Ray died because I hadn't been ready to open it. It was the box his brother Leonard had brought over after the funeral, the one that had been in Ray's home office. Leonard had said, "I didn't look through it, I just packed it up for you, take your time." I took the tape off slowly. Inside were files, mostly work things, receipts, old insurance papers. But at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a small notebook. Ray's handwriting on the cover. The dates ran from 2 years before he died to about 6 months before. He had written in it irregularly. Some entries were a few lines. Some were longer. I read every page. Most of it was ordinary. Thoughts about the garden, notes about a book he was reading, worries about his health. But in the last several entries, something changed. He wrote about a conversation he'd had with Brett, a conversation I had not known about. Brett had been asking questions, he wrote, about the property, about what would happen to things after. Ray had written, "I don't like the way he asks. Too much interest. Not enough heart." And then, in the second to last entry, 2 sentences that stopped me completely. He wrote, "Spoke to an attorney today. Doing this quietly for her." I went back to Frances the next morning with the notebook. She made a copy of the relevant pages. Then she made a call. By afternoon, she had confirmed something that changed everything. Ray, 8 months before he died, had amended the property deed for Lake Lure in a way that was separate from the joint deed on file. He had created what was called an enhanced life estate deed, sometimes called a ladybird deed, naming me as the sole beneficiary with automatic transfer rights that bypassed probate entirely. That deed had been recorded with the county. It was on file, it was valid. Whatever Merritt Family Holdings LLC believed it owned nothing. The property had never legally left my name. The transfer Brett had engineered was built on a foundation that did not exist, and the signature, Frances confirmed after the forensic review, had indeed been obtained through misrepresentation. I had signed something I was told was a tax consolidation form. What I had actually signed was an authorization document, but the underlying transfer it referenced was legally invalid because Ray's earlier deed superseded it. Frances said we had grounds to pursue full cancellation of the fraudulent LLC transfer, restitution for the funds removed from the savings account, and potentially a civil fraud claim. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the way you feel when the doctor confirms what you already knew was wrong. Not relieved exactly, just done with the not knowing. I called Patsy that night and told her everything. She cried. I didn't. I wrote Colette a letter, not an email. A letter, by hand, on the good stationery I save for things that matter. I told her I knew about the LLC. I told her I knew about the savings account. I told her I had retained an attorney and that the Lake Lure property remained legally mine and always had been. I did not accuse, I stated facts. I told her I had loved her for 41 years without condition, and that I would continue to love her, but that I would no longer allow love to be used as a reason to stay silent about harm. I told her she and Brett had 30 days to vacate any claims to the property and to arrange repayment of the funds removed from the account, or the matter would proceed through the courts. I signed it with my full name. Not Mum, my name. Dorothy Ann Whitfield. I sealed it and drove it to the post office myself. The response came 9 days later, not from Colette, from Brett, through an attorney, a 2-paragraph letter suggesting the transfer had been fully legal and that I had been properly informed. It was the kind of letter designed to look confident and be intimidating. Frances read it, set it down and said, "Good, now we know what we're working with. I am going to skip the legal proceedings themselves, because they are not the part of this story that matters most. What matters is that Frances was thorough and careful, and Ray had been thorough and careful before her, and the thing they had tried to build on top of our lives turned out to have no ground beneath it at all. The Lake Lure property remained mine. The repayment was ordered Colette and Brett did not contest the final judgment. What I want to tell you about is the Saturday after it was over, when I drove up to the cabin alone for the first time since I scattered Ray's ashes on that ridge. The leaves were full, deep summer green, and the air up there was 20 degrees cooler than in the valley. I parked and walked the path to the cabin without hurrying. The porch boards creaked under my feet in exactly the same way they always had. I unlocked the door, and it swung open, a little stiff from not being used, and the smell of pine and old wood came out to meet me. I sat on the porch for 2 hours and did not do anything in particular. I thought about Ray's note, about how he must have known, or suspected, and done what he could to protect me quietly, without alarming me, because that was exactly the kind of man he was. I thought about how I had spent 4 years missing him and being careful about everything except the one thing he had worried about. I thought about my daughters, both of them, so different from each other. Patsy, who had sat at my table with a printout and been brave enough to show me the truth. Colette, who I still did not fully understand and probably never would. I did not feel angry at Colette. I want to be clear about that too, because people sometimes expect anger. What I felt was something more like grief, with a different shape than what I was used to. Grief for what I had believed we were, for the version of her I had held on to past the point when the evidence suggested I should probably let go. When I came back down the mountain that evening, I stopped at the diner in town, where I had been eating since I was a young woman. Rita, who has worked the counter there for 15 years, poured me coffee without asking and said, "You look like you just did something hard." I said, "I think I did." She said, "Good for you," and moved on down the counter. I ate my pie and drove home in the dark. In the months that followed, something began to change in me that I hadn't expected. I had imagined that once the legal part was over, I would go back to normal, tend my garden, call Patsy on Sundays, make peace with the quiet. But the quiet felt different now. Not smaller, larger, like a room I hadn't realized I had been standing in the doorway of for years, never quite walking into. I started going to the senior centre on Thursday evenings. Not for the bingo, though I played a few rounds. For the conversations. There was a woman named Alice who had lost her home to a son-in-law in a reverse mortgage scheme she hadn't understood when she signed. There was a woman named Gert who said her adult children had slowly taken over every financial decision she made until she realized one day she didn't know the balance of her own checking account. There was a man named Roy who sat in the back and didn't say much but nodded every time someone described feeling invisible in their own family. I started talking. First just my own story, then other things, practical things. What a ladybird deed was, and why every widow in that room should ask their attorney about it. What to do if someone hands you a document at a family dinner and tells you it's a formality, what questions to ask, and who to call, and how to know when something that feels wrong is actually wrong. The centre director, a quiet woman named Phyllis, asked if I would consider leading a monthly workshop. I said yes before I had time to think about it carefully. The first one was held on a rainy Thursday in October with 7 people. I brought coffee and a yellow notepad and I sat at the same level as everyone else, because I was not there to lecture. I was there because 6 months ago I had not known the things I was now going to share, and because every person in that room deserved to know them too. By the 4th workshop there were 19 people. Colette and I speak occasionally now. Brief calls. Civil. She has not apologized directly, though once, toward the end of a call about nothing in particular, she said, "I know things went wrong, Mum." I said, "Yes." And then we talked about something else. I don't know if that is the beginning of something or the end of something. Some things take longer than a year to become clear. My grandson turned 7 last month. Colette texted me the date 3 weeks in advance. I drove up on the right day, and he ran down the driveway when he heard my car. I had brought lemon bars. He ate 4 of them before dinner, and I didn't say a word about it. Whatever was broken between his mother and me, none of it touched him. I made sure of that. There is a photo on my refrigerator now of the 2 of us from that afternoon. He's holding a lemon bar and grinning, and there is powdered sugar on his nose. I look at it every morning when I pour my coffee, and I think about Ray's note. About the ridge at Lake Lure and the fog off the water, and how he always made sure I stopped to look. Some people protect you loudly. They argue for you, defend you, announce their loyalty in rooms full of other people. Ray was never that kind. He was the kind who worked quietly, documented carefully, and trusted that I would eventually find what he left behind when I needed it. I needed it. I found it. That is enough. That is more than enough. If you have ever felt the ground shift under your feet without knowing why, if you have ever smiled and said everything is fine while something inside you kept a different count, I want you to know that the confusion is not weakness. Trusting the people you raised is not naivety. But when that trust is used against you, you are allowed to stop offering it. You are allowed to pick up the document, read every word, and say, "This is not what I agreed to." You built something. It belongs to you, and it is never too late to say so. I have thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the legal outcome, not the documents Ray left behind. I mean the part where I actually moved, where I stopped explaining things away and picked up the phone and called an attorney instead of calling Colette to ask if there had been a misunderstanding. For a long time, I believed that love and loyalty were the same thing, that if you loved someone deeply enough, the loyalty would follow automatically. I raised my daughters in that belief. I lived my marriage inside it, and it served me well for most of my life because Ray was that kind of man and Patsy is that kind of woman. But somewhere along the way, I stopped checking whether the people I extended that belief toward were holding up their end of it. I just kept offering trust like it renewed itself automatically, like a subscription I never thought to cancel. That is not wisdom. That is habit. And habits, even the ones built from love, can cost you everything if you never examine them. What I learned from all of this is that paying attention is a form of self-respect, not suspicion, not paranoia, just attention. Reading the documents before you sign them, noticing when the photo moves from the mantel to the hallway, asking what you actually agreed to at Easter dinner before you put down the pen. These are small acts, but they are the acts of a person who believes her own life is worth protecting. Ray understood this. He didn't talk about it much because he wasn't a man who announced his intentions. He just did the thing quietly and trusted that it would matter later. He sat down with an attorney 8 months before he died. Not because he was certain something would go wrong, but because he loved me enough to prepare for the possibility. That is intelligence in its deepest form. Not the kind that scores well on tests, the kind that looks ahead and acts while there is still time to act. I think about Colette sometimes and what led her to the choices she made. I don't think she is a purely calculating person. I think she let Brett lead her somewhere she might not have gone alone, and then she went along because stopping would have required her to admit what she had already agreed to. That is its own kind of trap. The consequences that found her were not punishment from any outside force. They were simply the natural result of what she had set in motion. You build something on a false foundation, and eventually the ground tells the truth. What I want to carry forward from all of this is not bitterness. I had my days of sitting at the kitchen table feeling the full weight of what had happened, and I don't minimize those days. But bitterness is a way of staying inside the wound. I chose to walk out of it. The workshops at the senior centre, the women who came in carrying their unopened bills and their shame, that was where I found out what the whole experience had actually been for. Not for me to suffer, for me to learn something I could hand to someone else before they lost what I almost lost. If you are the kind of person who trusts easily, who gives generously, who fills in every silence with the most charitable explanation you can find, I am not asking you to stop being that person. I am asking you to also be the person who reads the document, who asks the question, who calls Francis O'Caffel before the ground shifts under your feet instead of after. You built something. You are allowed to know what it is. You are allowed to protect it. And you are more than allowed to say, out loud, with your full name, "This is mine, and I am not letting go."